Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Training Tuesday. I am Bill Brown, the Director of Congregational Vitality, and tonight I am joined by TJ Mount, one of our Vitality specialists. He'll be our presenter tonight. We're going to just give a few minutes as people are still making their way into the room. I did want to give us some updates before we open up in prayer tonight. First update is we are recording tonight's presentation, and after tonight, it will be hopefully uploaded by the end of this week, beginning of next week, with the slide deck as an example so that you can not miss anything. If you are trying to take notes, we'll also have that available for you so that you don't miss anything. Our next training Tuesday will be on March 31st. And I want to make sure, I'm going to go to my little cheat sheet just to make sure I get this right. But we're going to be joined by one of our other vitality specialists, Lauren Jones, who will be walking us through a presentation and a training on fresh expressions, which are a way for us to go out into our communities and reach people who are not currently attending any church. So if you're looking to get a new take on some evangelism, you'll want to sign up and join us on March 31st. As always, if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature. And as we're getting that started, I'm going to open us up in prayer. And since today is St. Patrick's Day, I thought it would be more than appropriate to open with the prayer of St. Patrick. And I will actually be using the long version. So if you would pray with me, please. Oh God, as we arise or even arose today, may the strength of God pilot us, the power of God uphold us, the wisdom of God guide us. May the eye of God look before us, the ear of God hear us, the word of God speak for us. May the hand of God protect us, the way of God lie before us, the shield of God defend us, the host of God save us. May Christ shield us today. Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us, Christ beneath us, Christ above us, Christ on our right, Christ on our left, Christ when we lie down, Christ when we sit, Christ when we stand. Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of us, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of us, Christ in every eye that sees us, Christ in every ear that hears us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. TJ, welcome. It is a joy. TJ has been on our conference staff since July 1st, and I'm going to turn it over to you, TJ, and monitor our Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Bill, thank you. Well, welcome everyone this evening. Thank you for joining us on this St. Patrick's Day. As Bill mentioned earlier, I am one of the vitality specialists for the Baltimore-Washington and the Peninsula Delaware Episcopal area. And I'm excited to be with you this evening to explore what it means to lead together in the church. Not just as a skill, but also as a spiritual practice called collaboration. And as we begin our conversation this evening, I want to invite you to think about or to bring to your mind a real leadership situation as you engage with our conversation this evening. Something that may be happening at your church or maybe even at your work, where you're wondering to yourself, is collaboration needed in this situation? For this presentation, I just want to make sure that you all are aware that there were two books that heavily influenced this presentation this evening. The first book is Collaborating with the Enemy by Adam Kahan. And the second book is Church Conflict by Charles H. Cosgrove and Dennis D. Hatfield. I brought ideas from both of these books into this presentation because I have found them to be helpful and a resource in collaboration in the church setting. So our conversation this evening is going to follow a pattern of four kind of chapters, if you will, a journey of collaborative leadership. The first one is the perspective of the church. As a United Methodist church, we have a particular perspective at which we engage in collaboration. Our second chapter is going to be understanding the challenges that are present when it comes to collaboration, and there are several that are important to be aware of. The third is faith-filled practices. What are the things that we can practice that enable us to engage better in the process of collaboration? And the last I'm going to leave you with are some just practical insights that hopefully you'll be able to apply within your ministry context as it relates to collaboration. Now, I want to emphasize this, that collaboration is not a checklist. It's a journey. It's an experience. It happens over time. And the goal is not to master collaboration, but to grow in it, to experiment with it. And I want to make sure that you understand that each chapter builds on the previous one. We're going to be moving from the theology or the perspective of the church to practice and practical insights. For this presentation this evening, I've used the imagery of streams that flow into a river. In our first chapter, the perspective of the church, this is going to be the metaphor that is used. I want you to hold in mind the leaders, the ministries, and the perspectives of your context. And I want you to imagine these, the leaders, the ministries, and the perspectives, as individual streams that are flowing down to a river, and that river is the church's mission. And collaboration is what determines whether these streams flow together and form a river, or whether or not they run into barriers or dams blocking their flow. Throughout this presentation this evening, we'll return to this metaphor of streams flowing into rivers. So why does collaboration matter? Why not take another approach? I think there are three main drivers that drive us towards collaboration. The first one is complexity. The complexity of adaptive challenges cannot be solved by a single leader or a single person within a congregation. It requires us working with others. It requires us working with others not only within our congregations, but also within our communities. Number two, the reality of shared power in most church contexts. Very rarely is it that one person holds all the power within a congregation or a church setting. And therefore, because power is shared among the laity and among the clergy, we must work together. And number three, collaboration is no longer optional. It's essential for church ministry today. Though increasingly it's difficult to practice, and it can be frustrating and challenging, the urgency of the moment, of where we are in the life of the church, calls for openness to collaboration. In conversations that I've had with church leaders, most leaders already know that collaboration matters, that it's important. The question is, how do we practice it well? Why is it so difficult in the life of the church? One of the reasons is something called enimifying. And we've seen enimifying become a pattern within our culture. And enimifying is this: it's when leaders begin to see others not as potential helpers or problem solvers, but instead they begin to see them as obstacles or threats rather than partners. Now, this is rarely conscious or even malicious behavior. Instead, it shows up in avoidance, dismissal, eye rolls, and the quiet withdrawal of trust. Enimifying is a spiritual problem as much as it is a relational one. It narrows our imagination and blocks God's grace from flowing freely within our problem solving and collaboration. Jesus calls us to love our enemies, not to harm them and dismiss them. This enigmifying pattern is one of the things that stretch collaboration, a specific type of collaboration, is designed to interrupt. In chapter 2, we're going to look at and begin to understand the challenges of walking through and using collaboration. And the first challenge we're going to look at is our response to conflict. We don't collaborate just to collaborate. We collaborate because we're trying to solve a problem. And when we're trying to solve a problem, there's always conflict. Sometimes that conflict can be healthy. At other times, that conflict can be destructive. But what matters is our response to that conflict. There are 4 responses. Some leaders will force, some leaders will choose to adapt, some leaders will exit, and some leaders will collaborate. Let's take a look at each of these. So, when the challenge is adaptive and the stakes are high, only collaboration keeps the mission moving forward. Adam Kahan writes this. He says, "We try to collaborate when we want to change the situation we are in and think that we do so only if we work with others, where power is shared to change the situation." Now, this is important. These are not personality types. Any leader can choose to use any of these responses depending on the situation they are in. The question for leaders is this: which response is most faithful right now? The 3 conditions listed above, shared power, no clear winner, and an uncertain future, describe most significant ministry challenges facing our churches today. We have to acknowledge the fear that we have, the uncertainty that is present, and that underlies the resistance we have to true collaboration. When we collaborate with others, it can feel like we are losing control. It makes us feel vulnerable, and it opens us up to the possibility of being changed. The key insight is that collaboration requires leaders to stay present without needing to control the outcome of the situation. This can be difficult for many of us. In chapter 3, we're going to look at the faith-filled practices. I'm going to introduce to you stretch collaboration as a framework for the rest of the webinar. The key contrast is between stretch collaboration, which assumes agreement. The key contrast is with traditional collaboration, which assumes agreement as a prerequisite. Agreement on the problem that is being solved, agreement on the solution, and agreement on the plan to solve the problem. Or stretch collaboration abandons the assumption of agreement. Instead, what stretch collaboration says is we can move forward together even without agreeing on the problem, without agreeing on the solution, or even without agreeing on the plan. Friends, this is a significant reframe of collaboration. I want to ask you to take a moment and consider what it would mean for you to lead without needing agreement first. Would it be uncomfortable for you? Would you feel vulnerable? Would you feel like you might need to have some side conversations ahead of time to get some agreement before collaborating? That is not stretch collaboration. So what is stretch collaboration? Well, it consists of three faith-filled practices. The first one is embracing conflict and connection. Leadership isn't about avoiding the tension that's present. It's about holding both power and love in balance at the same time. When we embrace conflict as an opportunity for deeper connection, we create space for real transformation. It's also about experimenting a way forward. Faith doesn't mean that you have all the answers. It means being willing to try new approaches, to learn from what's happening in the moment and adjust course in real time. This is about faithful experimentation, moving forward with the intention and the openness, and trusting fully in God. But it also requires us to step into the game. We can't outsource our own spiritual formation and our own development. Each of us has to take responsibility for our own growth. This means showing up, being present, and actively participating in our own development in the midst of collaboration. In other words, in order to collaborate, we must be willing and open to change, not changing others, but changing ourselves. And these three practices work together. They're not separate ideas. They are interconnected ways of living out our faith in practical, everyday contexts as we collaborate in ministry. Let's take a look at the first practice, embracing conflict and connection. Healthy collaboration needs both power and love working together. They're complementary. They're not opposing forces. Power means asserting yourself, naming the differences, speaking truth boldly. This is about being direct and honest with love. It's about telling the truth about what you see, about what you believe, about what you hope. Love is about engaging deeply. It's about listening. It's about staying relationally connected, even in the tension and conflict. This is about maintaining the relationship through the tension. The problem in many churches is this: we lean too heavily into one side. Some emphasize power and truth-telling, but they lose the relational warmth required to do collaboration, while others prioritize harmony and connection, but they avoid the necessary conflict to move through and to truly work through an issue. Both are essential. You need both the lightning bolt and the heart to collaborate well and to solve problems. There's a tension that's present between this power and love. Love without truth becomes accommodation. We're just going along to get along. And we're not actually transforming anything or each other, and we're not truly making progress. Instead, we're sweeping it under the rug. Truth without love can become coercion. It's where we're forcing our perspective as if it's the only one. And in the process, we're destroying the relationships necessary to collaborate and to truly do the work. The real work happens in the tension between these two. We need both: the honesty to speak what matters and the care to preserve the relationship while doing it. Faithful collaboration requires holding on to both of these, power and love, simultaneously. It's not about comfort, but it is necessary. So how do you do that? What might this look like? Well, first, it might look like naming your convictions. You might start by being clear about what you actually believe about this situation or problem that you're trying to solve. Leaders, you need to know your own core values because you need to be able to communicate them effectively in order to collaborate effectively. If you're not clear, how can others be clear? This clarity will help others understand where you are coming from. What makes this important to you? Why are you engaging in this process to begin with? Second, you engage without correcting. I don't know about you, but I am a recovering fixer. When someone would tell me they're having a problem, I immediately jump to trying to fix it. I've learned over time that that isn't always the best approach, especially if they are not asking to be fixed. So how do you work on engaging without correcting? You learn to listen first. When someone shares a perspective different from yours, you resist the urge to immediately tell them they're wrong or to defend yourself, and instead you let them be heard. You ask questions. This builds trust and it opens the door to real dialogue. You listen holistically, not only to the words that are being said, but also to their body language, and even at times, the silence that is present. And third, you notice where power and love are at work. In any collaboration, you have to have the ability to watch the dynamic between power and love. Are you using your authority to shut people down? Or are you creating space for people to contribute meaningfully to the conversation? The best teams balance power with genuine care for one another. When one dominates the other, collaboration breaks down and the problem is not actually solved. Our second practice is experimenting a way forward. Leaders face limits. Leaders cannot plan their way through complex change. The variables are too many, the unknowns are too great. One person isn't able to deal with all this complexity. But real progress happens through faithful experimentation, giving yourself permission to try things, to learn, to adjust, and then move forward with a new experiment based off what you learned previously. In other words, this is an iterative process, not a linear process. The key here is giving yourself permission to experiment, to fail, and to learn and try again. This isn't some new way of thinking. When we look at scripture and church history, we see consistently how God works through unfolding processes. Abraham did not have the whole plan when God called him. The disciples didn't know what would happen next, but yet both Abraham and the disciples moved forward faithfully, learning about God's intent as they went forward. So give yourself and your teams permission to experiment, to build in intentional time of reflection and learning, and trust the process of discovery, that you don't have to know it all now to get to where you want to go. There are 4 modes of listening that I want us to consider this evening. These 4 modes are distinct modes of listening, and each one is fundamentally different in how we engage with what we hear. And Adam Kahan describes them as following. Downloading. Downloading, Adam says, is our default mode. We're listening, but we're mainly listening to confirm what we already believe. We're listening selectively, we're hearing selectively, we're filtering for information that fits into our existing worldview. This type of listening, it's passive and it's reinforcing. The second type of listening is debating. Here we're actively listening, but we're listening with a critical ear. We're tuned in to what we disagree with, looking for flaws in the argument of the other person or for some points to counter. This type of listening is adversarial listening. It's not listening to understand, it's listening to try to change the other person and to prove that we're right in our thinking. The third type of listening is dialoguing. This is where we shift. We listen with genuine curiosity and openness. We're interested in understanding the other person's perspective, not just waiting for our turn to speak. We're present and we're engaged with the other person. This dialoguing listening is much closer to what we're looking for. But there's even a deeper level of listening called presencing. This is the deepest level of listening. We're listening not just to what's being said, but to what's trying to emerge, the thing underneath what's being said, the possibilities, the potentials, the unspoken, the values and the beliefs that are underlying the words that are being spoken. This type of listening requires real presence and awareness beyond the words themselves. It requires a care and a genuineness, a level of concern for the other person and their position. Notice how each mode builds on the previous one, moving from passive and self-focused to active and open. A true generative type of listening. When we're engaging in collaboration, I want to invite you to be leaning into the presencing mode of listening, that highest form of listening. It means setting aside your own agenda, and we all have them. I know I do at times, and truly attending to what wants to emerge from the collaborative group. This isn't about problem solving or having all the answers or even walking away with an answer. It's about creating space for something new to unfold. When leaders listen this way, they open the door for the Spirit to move and work through the conversation that is occurring. When presencing people, you notice the body language and the image. You see the deep attentiveness, the presence, the peace. This is what presencing looks like in practice. The most generative conversations happen when we stop trying to steer and start truly receiving what is trying to be born in the moment. This requires vulnerability. It requires trust. It requires trusting that wisdom and solutions can emerge without forcing them. Our third practice is stepping into the game. And the first component of being willing to step into the game is self-awareness. Friends, collaboration breaks down when we expect others to change while we remain the same. Leaders must model the behavior and mindset they want to see. And that starts with honest reflection about our own patterns and our own blind spots. We all have them. We're human. It also requires systemic thinking, remembering that you're not separate from the system that you're leading. Your actions, your decisions, and your energy as a leader ripple through the entire congregation. Understanding this interconnection changes how you approach problems. Problems aren't those people over there or this thing over here. Instead, problems are we. They become we, that we are part of those problems. We've all contributed to them. And last but not least, stepping into the game requires personal formation. Your own willingness to grow and to change directly impacts those around you. When you as a leader commit to your own development, it invites others to commit to theirs. It creates a multiplying effect. This isn't selfish to focus on your own development. Instead, it's essential leadership work that benefits not only you, but everyone you are called to serve. As I mentioned earlier, these three practices work together, not separately. Awareness of self, understanding the system, and a commitment to growth create the foundation for authentic collaboration and leadership. It's what allows you to stay present in the midst of the tension and the conflict that this work requires. The leader has to be able to examine his or herself honestly. This is about looking inward first, not outward first, but inward first. Collaborative leaders don't point the fingers at others when things get tense. Instead, they ask the question, how have I contributed to this situation? They ask themselves questions like, what am I doing that might be contributing to this conflict? Where am I falling short in this process? The second point is crucial. Faithful collaboration requires being open to God's leading, even when that means we need to change. It's not just about changing tactics or strategies. It's about being willing to transform how we actually lead and how we see and think about the problem. It's this self examination that sets the foundation for collaboration. Before we can expect others to collaborate differently, we as leaders have to be willing to examine ourselves and respond to God's call for our own growth and our own change and development. In chapter 4, we're moving from theory into practical application as we look at how do we integrate collaboration into ministry. And the key message here is this: understanding collaboration isn't enough. Watching this webinar isn't enough. Reading the books isn't enough. You need to actually implement it in your ministry context. In other words, to learn how to collaborate, you have to be open to collaboration, which means being open to experimenting and some of the other skills that we've talked about. The practices that feel hardest to adopt are usually the ones that are most needed. When you feel resistance to a collaborative approach, that's a signal, not a stop sign, to lean into that discomfort, because that's where real growth happens. Look for where grace feels blocked and stuck in your ministry. These are the bottlenecks that are worth addressing. When you identify these friction points, you know exactly where to direct your collaborative efforts. This focused approach creates the most meaningful change. In other words, where you see tension and where you feel uncomfortable, that is actually where you need to do this work the most. The bottom line is this: use resistance and blocked grace as your guide for where to start implementing collaboration in your context. The next thing, practice is designing faithful experiments. Faithful collaboration isn't about detailed master plans and having everything figured out ahead of time. Instead, it's about small, intentional experiments that allow us to learn and adjust as we go. Here are some things you might want to consider when creating an experiment like this. First, make sure that the experiment is relational. Keep connection and trust at the center. Experiments that you engage in should strengthen relationships, not strain them. Look for things that are low risk. Start small so that we can learn without major consequences. This gives freedom to try, fail, and adjust, while also helping people move through this process and learn it. Keep your experiment time bound. Be clear about when an experiment is going to start and when that experiment is going to end. This helps us evaluate what we've learned and to decide next steps. Keep the experiment spirit-led. Ground everything that you experiment with in prayer and discernment, listening for God's guidance, not just your own ideas or the congregation's ideas, but truly being open to what God is doing in the midst of the experiment. The combination of these four elements creates space for genuine learning and growth while collaborating. Collaboration is not easy. And here are just a few of the common challenges that congregations face when they lean into collaboration. The first one is resistance. Leaders often struggle with letting go of control and may be uncomfortable with diverse perspectives. I know that I have been uncomfortable when I've walked into a conversation and I don't know what the perspective of the other people in the room is. This resistance is a natural pushback when people are asked to work differently. The second challenge is trust deficits. Many organizations, including the church, carry baggage from previous failed initiatives or strained relationships. I know I've heard before, oh, Pastor, we tried that before. Oh, Pastor, we done that a long time ago. And these past experiences make people skeptical about collaboration efforts in the here and now. The third challenge is unclear expectations. Without clarity on who decides what and what everyone's role is, collaboration can break down quickly. People need to know how decisions are being made and what are the expectations when they enter into collaboration. And last but not least is sustainability concerns. It's easy to start something new, but keeping this collaborative practice alive requires ongoing commitment and reinforcement. And this is where many initiatives lose momentum. Collaboration isn't something that you do when it's easy. It's something that becomes a way of life in the culture of your congregation. Here are a few signs of healthy collaboration. These are things that you might look at and become aware of as you're asking yourself, is collaboration in my context healthy or an area that we need to work on? The first one is leaders remain present in the tension. They don't avoid difficult moments or check out when things get comfortable, but they stay engaged and they work through the process. They trust the process of collaboration. Second, differences are named openly. People aren't tiptoeing around disagreements. They bring them into the light and explore them with genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness. Third, experiments are tried, evaluated, and adjusted. There's a willingness to test new approaches, to see what happens, to learn from it, and to make changes. The process is iterative and it's adaptive. Leaders acknowledge their own contributions. They're not pointing fingers. They own their part in the problem, and they model accountability for everyone else in the group. And grace flows more freely. There's more forgiveness, there's more patience, there's more understanding moving through the group, even in the midst of the tension and the conflict. People within the group assume good intent about each other and they extend compassion and love. These 5 things together create an environment where real collaboration can be fruitful. When leaders choose collaboration instead of enmifying, real transformation can occur. Energy that was going into conflict gets redirected, and now it's available for what actually matters, your mission. When you bring different perspectives to the table, you actually get better solutions than any single viewpoint could create. And trust grows and builds across your congregation when people see leaders working together. And God's grace, His generosity and power flows more freely when we're united rather than divided. The image in the slide shows multiple streams coming together into a delta. That's what collaboration looks like. Separate currents becoming something more abundant and life-giving when they join together than when they were separate and stagnant. here are a few takeaways from our conversation this evening. Number one is collaboration is essential. The church cannot solve the hardest problems it is facing alone. Not one leader, not one layperson. Collaboration is essential. Leading together means being comfortable with shared responsibility, even when we don't have all the answers or control. Second, we have to balance both power and love. These are not opposite things. We need to be both honest with direct communication and have genuine care for the people we're working with. Truth without connection fails. Connection without truth isn't real. Third, we need to experiment faithfully. Change does not happen through perfect planning. It happens when we try something, see what we learn, and adjust. When we stay committed to the direction while remaining flexible on the path. And last but not least, we have to change ourselves first. You can't ask others to transform if you're not willing to do your own work. We must take ownership of how we show up and what we contribute to the system that we're participating in. So my question to you is this: where is God calling you to collaborate? Here's a quote: God calls leaders to remain present in conflict, to trust in uncertainty, and to allow themselves to be changed so that grace can keep flowing. I want to take a moment to emphasize the three key elements of this work: staying connected in conflict, not avoiding or withdrawing. Number two, trusting God in uncertainty, those times where we feel like we're in the wilderness. We don't want to be like the Israelites who wanted to return back to back to Egypt. We want to continue to follow God through the wilderness to the promised land, which means that we move forward even when we don't have all the answers. And number three, we must allow ourselves to be changed. We must be vulnerable. Take off the mask. Let people see who we truly are, what we truly believe, what we truly desire, and we must be open to grow. And when we connect these things, looking at the path through the forest, there's an invitation forward, even though the path may be unknown. The light ahead is calling us to move forward with grace. For this and collaboration is about grace continuing to flow through us as leaders when we embrace these practices of collaboration. I thank you for your time this evening, and I pray that as streams join to form a mighty river within your context, that your collaborative leadership will strengthen the life of your church, your congregation, and multiply grace in the community that you serve. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, TJ. You have given us a lot to chew on tonight. So far, we don't have any questions yet in the Q&A, so I'm going to ask a couple, and I'm going to invite everyone to open up the chat for this one, and make sure you select everyone, not just host and panelists. You should be able to chat with everyone, so select everyone. I put a couple of questions in, TJ, that I was hoping people would answer. They didn't yet, so I'm going to ask them again because I'm just curious, because you brought up some things that just made me think. You talked a number of times about change. So my first question is for our participants: how open to change are you really? So drop that answer in the chat for me. How open to change are you? Now I know someone will go first. Let me make it easy. Someone said I am. We're very open. Okay, because I was going to say if you weren't sure on a scale of 1 to 5, if 1 is I'm not going to change and 5 is I'll try anything once on a scale of 1 to 5. Let's not even go 1 to 10. We'll make it simple. 1 to 5. 1 is not at all. 5 is I'll do anything once, twice if I like it. All right. Now, a number of people are saying 5, and I hope we're being honest. I know TJ and I were out working with a church a couple of weeks ago, and in our assessment of the church, a resistance to change among some people had come up, and we had one person in attendance that night who came up to us at the end of the gathering and said, "Yep, I'm one of those people. I don't want to change at all, and I don't understand why we have to." So I think, TJ, why do you think people, particularly in the local church, may be resistant to change?
Well, I think it boils down to values and beliefs that they value certain aspects of their tradition of the church, or there's a part of the church that they really connected with, and the imagination or the thinking of losing that is painful. It's a grief process, right? You are losing something, and so I think, and I fall into this. So please don't hear me say that I'm any different than anyone else. You know, um, but the question is sometimes, how do we change well? In other words, I'm reminded of the time whenever I was working as a financial advisor, and people would come in after retirement, and they would be faced with a choice to downsize their home and to be able to enter into retirement successfully, or keep their home and retirement be a struggle for them. And a lot of these conversations, they would tell me, "Oh, well, you don't understand. This is the room where my daughter had her first dance, and this is where this happened." And they would bring up all of these experiences
Yes.
that were important and that they valued, but they had connected them to a property or a place. And so the question was, how can you take those experiences and incorporate them into your what's new? And I think sometimes we fail to help people make that connection. When we're inviting them to change, we just want them to leave the old and adopt the new, not understanding that there's a process that we need to go through in order to do that well so that people can do that well.
And the number of times I've heard from within local churches, both that I have served as pastor and worked with, who have said, my parents got married here, my children were baptized here, my husband's funeral was held in this space, and they've equated experience and memory
Yeah.
with space.
Yep.
And for all the people, I really appreciate your willingness to change. And not that I doubt you, but I have pointed to this before, that in 2007, Alan Deutschman wrote a book called Change or Die, where he scientifically proved that most people would rather die than change. He studied open heart surgery patients, and they were told after the open heart surgery that if they did not change some of their health habits, like they needed to start exercise, if they were smoking, they needed to stop, if they drank, they needed to stop drinking, they had to eat healthier, and if they didn't do those things, they would definitely die. And of all of the patients that he studied, 90% returned to their previous behavior and did not make the necessary health changes that the doctors told them they had to make. So they rather die than make the changes.
Hmm.
And so that's just something to keep in mind. My other question is for everybody. One person answered it. I do want to give a shout out to our former conference lay leader, Dolores Martin. She was brave enough to put an answer in the Q&A, but what can we learn from failure? We have in this, I think, in our culture, this hesitancy or this fear of failure. So while people are dropping in the chat, what can we learn from failure? TJ, in your experience, why are we afraid to fail? And what can we do about that?
Well, failure means that we've missed the mark, right? Right. I mean, you know, and at times that can hurt and it can be uncomfortable. But I think really what it points to is that we haven't done the work before the failure that's needed to be able to learn from the failure. And what I mean by that is that so many times we experiment with something and we just say, well, let's just try this and go do it without really setting any expectations, without having any parameters, and without actually laying out a framework from which then we can evaluate and learn. Um, and so I think it's important as we're experimenting to be intentional about our experimenting. Right? What are we experimenting? Why are we experimenting? How are we experimenting? And answering those questions so that if it does fail, we understand where did it fail at and what would we need to adjust to try again or to experiment again in the future.
And I like how you phrase that, TJ, that you use the word several times, experiment. And I'm always drawn back to high school science class where experimenting was encouraged, where we created a hypothesis, then we created an experiment to test our hypothesis, and either we proved or disproved the hypothesis. So the experiment really never failed. It just proved or disproved. And if our hypothesis was wrong, we just reconfigured it or reconfigured the experiment. And I think if we would, in the local church, frame things more around an experiment versus a change, that might influence how we approach it. If we come in to say, we're going to experiment with this idea for this season, and see what happened. Now, I do see somebody has their hand raised, and if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A so that we can answer your question. So please put your questions in the Q&A. My other
But can I
question,
just say,
go
say
ahead.
something to that,
You
that comment that
may.
you made? Um, I think it's important. You mentioned the time bound. I think that that does a few things, right? One, when you're experimenting, it's not that you have to let go of everything right now, right? Right?
Right.
Because a lot of times the tension that people get caught in is, well, I've got to give up A in order to experiment with B, and I'm not willing to give up A, which then you get stuck. And what we're suggesting is that you say, no, we're going to experiment with B, but we're going to experiment with B for 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, we're going to look at this together as a congregation or as a leadership team, and we're going to reflect on what we learned, both positive and negative. Nothing's perfect. and
Right.
so and so it gives you permission to try things and to not get stuck before you even begin. And I think that that's important.
And I'm glad you brought that up to that last statement because one of the things we value as an Episcopal area is the freedom to try.
Yeah.
And if we begin, if we stop trying, then I just think that we're done. Now, someone did put failure is scary, but we should be able to start over and go through the process again with new parameters. Absolutely. Failure is scary. Change is scary, but doing nothing is a form of change and is just as scary. Now, I guess my last question would be, TJ, you make a good case and you gave us some great resources on why and how to collaborate. And when I looked at this and when I looked at your topic and then just listening to you today, I want to first add, while I absolutely agree this is a wonderful tool, resources, process, approach within the local church, I know within our Episcopal area, we've started in the Baltimore-Washington conference. We're looking at some opportunities to expand it, but these collaborative hubs that churches are within the Baltimore-Washington conference, we call them collaborative hubs for a reason. And I think, TJ, your process that you outline here tonight is one that can be used with the hubs as well. But big question is, why do we hesitate to collaborate? Why, I'm going to let you think. I'm going to invite people to drop into the chat why they think we hesitate to collaborate. Put your answers in the chat and give TJ an opportunity to kick us off on that conversation.
Yeah, I think a few things. The first thing that comes to my mind, Bill, is that it's scary being vulnerable. It's we're not used to taking the mask off of the person we want to project to people and want people to see, and setting it aside and being our authentic self with another group of people. And that is what collaboration truly requires. It requires us to be willing to be our authentic selves, to say, I believe this, right? And to say, I value this. While other people sitting across from you may say, well, I don't value that. Right,
Hmm.
right. And that tension, right, is makes it difficult. The other thing that I think is that we, the church, might have a nice problem. And what I mean by that is that we've been trained and taught, well, as Christians, we're nice. We don't hurt other people. We don't, and what that's become is as soon as I feel that the other person across from me has some tension or maybe there's some conflict arising, I just give up my position and I say, oh, okay. And so it doesn't feel like collaboration, even though that's what we're trying to engage in. It doesn't feel that way. And we walk away from the process saying, well, I didn't, that wasn't collaboration. Why would I do that again? And so I think that we've experienced collaboration in a negative way in the past, and we bring that with us into the future. And so I'm hopeful that this new idea of stretch collaboration that I introduced this evening, that's from the book Collaborating with the Enemy, which which was very helpful for me, um, will help us to see that there is a different way of doing collaboration. But the truth is, Bill, it begins with us, the individual person. How are you showing up? How are you listening? Are you willing to be changed? Are you open? And that's uncomfortable.
Well, and I think also just, and particularly based on some of the responses we're getting in the chat, this whole idea that we think if we collaborate, we're losing, or if we think we
Yeah,
collaborate, we could be wrong, or if we think we're collaborating, we'll have lost control, and we forget that the real collaboration is a give and take.
yeah,
It's not a consensus, but it is a working together until something, I would even say something new could emerge.
yeah.
Something
That's
that
exactly it.
nobody else thought of, or that no individual person thought of, but that together we came up with a new approach. And hopefully, I liked how you tied that into God's discernment, because so often we are really quick to figure out what we want to do without spending some serious time um, listening for what God's already doing to see how we can get a line in that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, TJ, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody
Thank you.
for participating with us tonight. If you could drop in the chat a big thank you to TJ, who has taken his time to not just to research and to present tonight. Um, I'm going to invite TJ, if you want to drop your email in the chat, if people have further questions about collaboration and want to get a hold of you, what is the best email to reach you? And as TJ's doing that, again, I do want to remind you, I did put it in the chat earlier, but our next Training Tuesday is on March 31st. We're going to be doing an introduction to fresh expressions, just to learn some new ways, or maybe even just some rediscovering some old ways of reaching people who are not a part of any church. And so you can sign up for that. We have a lot of places where you can register. You can go to the Baltimore-Washington Conference website. You can go to the Peninsula Delaware Conference website. You can go to the Episcopal area website, and we have registration links on all of those places. So again, TJ, thank you so much for joining us, for leading us tonight. Thank you, everyone else. for joining us, but we do have an important question. TJ, why did you cut your hair? And I don't usually say who asks these questions, but Dolores Martin wants to know, why did you cut your hair, TJ?
Okay. Are you guys ready for this? Because I woke up one morning and my hair was in my mouth and I said, I'm done with this. And I went and got my hair cut. That's the honest truth. It had gotten so long, it was going into my mouth and I was like, I'm done with this. And so, yep.
See, I would have said he got his haircut so he would just look incredible for tonight's presentation. But your answer is just as good and just as real.
That's the
Thank you for
authentic
being that.
answer right there.
And somebody is saying TJ was not afraid of change. So thank you for demonstrating that for us, TJ. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Looking forward to seeing everyone again on March 31st. God bless you. Happy St. Patrick's Day and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye.